The Joe Rogan Experience.
First of all, anybody who really wants to know you in depth in your element, talking with a fellow warrior, I strongly recommend that podcast.
Yeah.
For people who don't, what number is it? Do you know which number?
I don't know what number it is.
I was just listening to it. It's Jocko Podcast 115, Into the Fire and Beyond the Call of Duty.
Yeah.
And Jocko is a fucking beast, and you two together talking about the incidents that happen with you overseas, it's insane. I mean, it is like I had to call a buddy of mine. I had to stop the podcast and call my friend Brendan just to talk to him.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so intense. It's like I was driving, I was getting nervous, right? You know, I'm driving in my fucking car, my Tesla, right?
Yeah.
My little electric car. I'm driving, my hands are sweating, and I'm breathing heavy. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah.
It was.
Well, if you hear all those, like, you know, when you're listening to that podcast, that was by far the most. I mean, Jocko just pulled it out of me, like, right? Like, you know, most everybody hits like the high points of it, but you know, me and Jocko just made that connection. It was the first time we'd ever met, and
really?
Face to face. Yeah, we just went, like, you know, he actually picked me up from the airport, and we went there and we sat down and did the podcast, and I don't know, I think he knew the questions to ask, because I think it was good for both of us, because you know, if you got to the point kind of in the middle of it, if you start hearing those silences, it was both of us trying to keep from tears falling, right? Like, it was like that moment you're trying to, it just, you know, we really connected, and it was, you know, it was a tough podcast.
Well, you could tell, because for Jocko, I mean, I listen to a lot of Jocko's podcasts, but that was one where he was really in his element. First of all, it's very obvious he has a deep respect for you and who you are and what you stand for. And then two, it brought him back to his own experiences in war. And so the whole thing is just, it's one of the most intense podcasts I've ever listened to, if not the most intense.
Wow.
It's fucking heavy, man.
Yeah, it was heavy. It was a hard one. You know, he, like you said, I think Jocko was getting as much out of it as I was, right? And I have the utmost respect for Jocko. The guy is just, you know, he's the epitome of a warrior all around, you know, like from day in and day out. I mean, he wakes up every day and lives the things that he says. I mean, you know, he does what he says, and he lives it, and he puts people first, and he's just, I mean, he's one of the greatest guys I've ever met.
And I agree. I couldn't have said it better. And Tim Kennedy as well. You know, we're both friends with Tim, and that's the same thing. That kind of, it's a rare human being.
It
both
is.
Of those guys.
It is, you know, and I think that's what, like, you know, that's what I'm so fortunate about. Is like I'm surrounded by just people like that, right? Like, you know, I'm so fortunate to have a circle like that. You know, I think that's what makes us who we are. You know, I mean, that's the epitome is iron sharpens iron, and when you're surrounded by guys like Jocko and Tim Kennedy and I mean, well, you have no option. But even if you're last in that group, like you're still above average, you know?
Well, there's a cliche, you know, that comes up when people talk about military, you know, that, you know, people will say things, and sometimes it's hard to understand whether or not they grasp exactly what they're saying, but that people make sacrifices so that you could be free. And I don't think people it's hard to truly internalize that without having experienced what you've experienced, what Jocko and Tim Kennedy have experienced. When I'm listening to it, I know that it's correct. I know that it's true. I support it 100%, but it's almost like an alien thing to me because I've never experienced it. So when hearing you guys talk about it and climbing inside your head for a bit and listen to you describe it, that cliche, the land of the free because of the brave, it gets highlighted where you understand, like, this is why America's not like it is in other places, because of this strong military. And one of the things you guys talked about in that podcast was this idea of us invading Afghanistan. You were fighting alongside Afghans.
Absolutely.
And most people who talk about war will have this peripheral, sort of cursory understanding about what they would like the world to be like. Mm-hmm. You know, that they would like no war, and that, oh, this is terrible, we shouldn't be over there. They don't truly understand what you understand.
You know, they don't. And I think, you know, the perspective that I get to come back, and I think all these guys telling their stories, you know, from Rob O'Neill to Marcus Luttrell, like, I think every warrior out there has to tell their story to make people understand, right? Like, it's so important for that, because we've got a perspective of the world that a lot of people don't get.
Yes.
And, you know, I mean, I stood next to people, that we couldn't, like you talk about not believing, not being raised, not coming from the same place, not having, we could have found every reason not to be on the same ground, but we stood next to each other and were willing to die for each other. We chose to find the common denominator. And that was because there's only two types of people in this world. There's good and evil.
Yes.
That it really comes down to that. Like war is so simple. Life is so simple. When you try to complicate it, there's other reasons. And it's like this whole thing, we were all over there fighting for this, for the belief to be free, this belief of democracy, this belief of what we all live for. And you can't see it, but we live it every day, and we were willing to give our lives for people we didn't even know, people we didn't even meet.
One of the things you talked about with Jocko, you said you didn't just lose 4 brothers that day. You lost 10 because you lost 6 Afghani brothers as well.
Yeah, the Afghans were as close to me as the Marines were. My team of Afghan soldiers, I lived on a base. It was 4 U.S. and 80 Afghans. And every day I went out on patrol, and I'm patrolling with them, and they're no different than me and you. They just want a place. I'll never forget that really hit home to me is I had an Afghan. We were sitting up on the mountain. Actually, the cover of my book, it was that day. We were sitting on that mountain because we had chased some Taliban up that hill, and we were sitting up there. And this Afghan looked at me and he just said, "I hope that someday you can bring your family here on vacation. I hope that we can get it to that point."
Wow.
And it really hit home to me. It's like, we're all just alike. We're all just alike. We all just want to live a great life, and we all just want to get along. I mean, if you don't get along, it's because you choose not to get along.
For people who don't understand the conflict in Afghanistan, explain what is happening and why we're over there.
Yeah, so basically Afghanistan, and it was the same thing in Iraq too. I mean, that's where these terrorist organizations were, right? And we're over there fighting alongside Afghanistan. We're over there fighting alongside Iraq. We're not fighting Iraq and fighting Afghanistan. We're fighting alongside both of those countries and trying to rebuild it up and trying to get rid of these terrorist cells that are inside those countries. Like you said, I mean, everybody thinks that we're fighting Iraq and we're fighting Afghanistan, and it's not the case. We're alongside them, helping them rebuild their countries.
When you go to Black Rifle Coffee in Salt Lake, those guys are awesome.
Awesome.
They brought a bunch of former Afghani troops over, and they work for them over there. Like a lot of the guys working in the factory.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, I got like these guys are so close to these people. They brought them back and gave them jobs in America.
Absolutely.
And this is, I just think most people don't really have a full picture of what's at stake and why it's even happening. They just don't want war, right?
They just don't want war, but it's like, I mean, there's no way. I mean, you can go in your house and lock your doors and sit there and try to pretend that the evil that we fight doesn't exist, but it exists. It exists. It's there. It's there. And if we don't go fight it over there, it's going to come here. That's
another cliche that seems alien to people. It's a true statement. It's always been true throughout human history. But when you live in a country like America, we're so fortunate. It's so awesome here. Even when it sucks, it's awesome. In comparison to the rest of the world, it's very rare that you have a place where you really can start at the bottom and make your way up to be a successful person. I mean, literally, you can start here and come from nothing and within your generation be the president of the United States. You could literally start from that, and it's the only country on the face of the planet.